Bom dia a todos. É com enorme prazer que eu estou aqui em resposta ao convite do Ravi para vos falar sobre educação. Não tão especificamente sobre o projeto de educação para a sustentabilidade, mas para a necessidade de provocarmos uma ruptura na educação também. Eu peço-vos desculpas porque não me atrevo a falar espanhol. Eu já disse ao Ravi, fala portunhol, fica um portunhol terrível, e eu decidi que era preferível falar em inglês. Trago o texto em inglês, porque há muitas palavras que são diferentes, que têm outro significado. Eu falo, e se vocês me permitem, é por uma questão de respeito e de consideração pela língua espanhola que eu vou optar por uma língua neutra, for a neutral language. Okay, so the topic of my presentation is Brave Postmodern World. I designed brave because I remember of Brave Modern World of Aldous Huxley, as you know, that utopia from the years 30 of last century. So, in a context of accelerating change at all levels of life, formal education insists being in the same box created at the times of Industrial Revolution and precautiously locked like with a key since then. Probably due to this resistance against change and innovation, education as a scientific area is not taken into account in the development of the societies. And we have many examples. For example, in the big applications, the big calls for applications for financement, education is neglected because no one pays attention to education, has no way, no means for change. And as an academic of curriculum studies, which is an area of education, this worries me a lot. Because education has everything to do with knowledge and intelligence, with potentiality to create new flexibilities for people's behaviors and attitudes. But I also agree that a paradigmatic shift is necessary in the way school works nowadays. And still, in the introductory part of this presentation, I should say that there is a direct relationship between the school and the curriculum. And what does that curriculum mean? Meaning everything we learn at school. What is curriculum? Curriculum is everything we learn at school. After all losses operated since it was idealized, then written, then understood by the school, put into practice by the teachers, and finally experienced by the students. The real curriculum covers a small part of what was idealized. So if we have, and we have another part very important, the hidden curriculum. So I bring here just to see how much the curriculum idealized loses until it reaches the students. So first we have the ideological curriculum planned by maybe politicians of education
approved in parliaments. So this is the ideological curriculum. But until it turns to the written phase, to the formal curriculum, some details are lost. Then we have the perceived curriculum. So the written curriculum comes to the schools, and the schools interpret it and reformulate it and adapt to the situation of the schools. Then we have the operational curriculum. One thing is what we understand of curriculum, of the programs, of the decree laws, and another thing is how we operationalize, how we execute it at school. And there are losses again due to some interest, some deviation of attention, some students who ask something. So the teacher cannot control everything he wants to transmit at school. And finally, the experiential, because the students are thinking of the football match or about the girl outside waiting for him. So there is a little piece of curriculum which is lived, experienced by the student. But don't forget, we have a bigger part of curriculum. If I say that curriculum is everything that we learn at school, so we have to pay attention to the organization of the school, of the roles we transmit, the social classes. There are lots of messages transmitted in a hidden way, not aware. Maybe sometimes teachers are not aware of other messages he or she is conveying to the student. In any case, there is something, either we think that curriculum is knowledge, attitudes, abilities, values, contents. We think that there is a great inadequacy between the school and the other systems, because we have to face education as a subsystem of a macro system composed by social system, cultural system, ideological system, scientific system, etc., religious system, that there is an interaction of all those systems. So it is not time to look at education in school apart from the influences of the other systems up to the educational system. So the school, so now I want to explain the reasons of that inadequacy. Because the school we still have is a product of modernity. And if you have a historical background, we see that modernity, when it arises, there was a design to have a rupture with the dogmatic and religious thought of the medieval ages. So, the modernity looked at the classical authors. Look at the Greeks. It was the movement of the Renaissance, something that was born again. The Renaissance, where it was allowed to have pleasures, the pleasures of life, the pleasures of love, the body pleasures. We have the god of wine, Baco, the god of beauty, the gods, the goddess and the gods. So they could drink a lot, they could do everything. So those pleasures related to the body are now valued again through the paintings, to the many ways of arts. So the modernity, we can say the modernity have 4 pillars. It's based on 4 pillars. First, the Renaissance, as I've told you. Another great movement was the Reformation, the Protestant Reformation. The Protestant Reformation put in question the dogmas, the absolute truths transmitted by the Catholic Church that dominated the medieval ages. Then another movement, the French Revolution. The French Revolution that brought the new principles of fraternity, equality, and all those things. So this will mark necessarily the modernity. And finally, the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution that in the ends of 19th century, beginnings of 20th century, that started with a belief in science and technology. There was not the God, but there was another God, a substitution of God, science and technology that would solve all natural and social problems, the humanity that plagued the humanity. According to another called Andy Hargreaves, modernity is a social condition that is guided and sustained by the Enlightenment beliefs in rational scientific progress, the triumph of technology over nature, so technology will dominate nature, and the ability to control and improve the human condition through the application of this source of knowledge and scientific and technological expertise to the field of social reforms. The idea is to transfer from this new area of science and technology to the soft sciences that were emerging then. So in an attempt to better describe it, he relied on 4 levels of analysis: the economic, the political, the organizational, and the personal level. Let's see the first, which characterizes modernity. This author considers that modernity marks the transition from the family's working place, where everything was done. We planted, we cooked, we mended the shoes, we made flour, we made the bread. So everything was done around the family, where specialization to the factory, where specialization reaches its maximum, initiating the process of serial production, characteristic of capitalist monopoly or state socialism, as ways of increasing what? Increasing productivity and efficiency. The work processes become highly specialized, separating managers from workers, planning from execution, the work of thinking from the work of doing. So this is at the economic level. Then, at the political level, what modernity brought? He associates modernity to the consolidation of the nation state as a military force, a welfare state which regulates the relationship between, on the one hand, education, health, and social security, and on the other hand, the economy. It was supposed that the centralization of power, directly linking to the decision-making and the application of the Keynesian economic policies, would make the state stronger and more interventionist, that is, a planned paternalistic state. The state looked at the citizens as if they were its children, the nation state. It was not the town state from the Greeks, but the nation state, where the state is strong and interventionist. The state is responsible for building schools, for building hospitals, for taking care of the health of the citizens, etc., etc., etc. At organizational level, these principles are reflected in heavy bureaucratic processes, strongly and hierarchically segmented into divisions of technical competence. The key word is bureaucracy and the fragmentation of responsibilities and in an hierarchical order. And finally, at a personal level, he considers that the organization of this type of system with this kind of order, if on the one hand could build some sense of identity and collective belonging, on the other could also lead to alienation, dictated by rational impersonality. It is the time where the identity is collective. I feel Portuguese, I feel Spanish, I feel so associated to the nation state. But the persons are not looked at individually, as an individual, but as part of a bigger group. So these principles were reflected at the modernity school. For example, learning stopped being a natural process within the family, to be developed in a specific place, not the factory, but at the school, with specializing tasks. Geography, teacher of geography, who is the director, who is the head of department. This organization is modern. And covering as many children and young people as possible, importing from the factory the idea of serial production. The many, how many, the number is important. Mass teaching could be in the end a very powerful means of domesticating minds, disciplining attitudes and habits, such as punctuality, how to be punctual, for example, in the logic of division of time into equal parts. How many minutes? 60 minutes or 50 minutes, 10 minutes to a break. So this order, this logic of order and division of time, whether it was sunny or rainy, which was not easy for those who were accustomed to working in the countryside in a time regulated by the seasons. Those attitudes and habits were needed for greater productivity, As in the factories, it was important to achieve maximum efficiency with a minimum of time and cost. The technical rationality that permeated the world of work in a context of industrial revolution thus accentuated the relation between the means and the ends. In 1911, as you know, Friedrich Taylor had developed for industry a theory of scientific management. Pay attention that the adjective scientific or technological starts appearing in this phase. If something wants to be recognized, it should have the adjective of scientific. This is what happened with Taylor, the theory of scientific management, based on the so-called job analysis. So we have an activity, a job, let's divide it as much as possible so that we can do it automatically without thinking, so we would have greater productivity because you don't need time to think about. This reminds us Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times, the movie, Charlie Chaplin. He couldn't deviate his attention to anything. So, the curriculum model. So, in terms of curriculum, these ideas passed to the curriculum, and Franklin Bobbitt, who is the father of this area of curriculum studies, the curriculum model proposed by Bobbitt was intended to transfer to the school this culture of scientific efficiency and effectiveness. These two terms, they're slightly different. Inspired by the factories, since education, he said, was a process of molding as much as the manufacture of steel rails. Don't forget that we were witnessing the expansion of the railways. So he said, it's easy. If we can mold the steel rails, it is easier to mold the children. The curriculum can do that. The logical ordering and control through elements such as the bell. The bell train started with the factories, and the education brought it to the school. The synchronization of tasks. Everybody let's do copy. Now everybody let's do this. Reading. Now you can go out together. You can come in. So the synchronization of tasks. The concentration of people in a closed building. The stratification by years and levels of education. The division of students by age. The assumption of two social classes, teachers on one side and students on the other one, and above all, the fragmentation of knowledge. Putting aside emotions and affections, all this marked the factory school of modern times. The scientific management of education required a precise design aiming to achieve general and specific objectives. See, this idea of order. There are general, then specific objectives categorized into cognitive, affective, and psychomotor objectives, and deployed into many behavioral and operational objectives. So the idea was that the individual, we can divide into parts. So he has the cognitive part, the intellectual part, then the affective part. I think, sorry, maybe it's not. I removed the sound, but even so, I thought that I had removed the sound, but no, sorry. So the individual has three parts: cognitive, the affective, and the psychomotor, and each part should be divided into other parts, from the simplest to the most complex. There was always in the modern times, it was explicit, this way of thinking. The rationale Tyler, so there was no questioning about what to teach, or what for. So the rationale Tyler, we called rationale because Ralph Tyler is another curriculist that congregated all these principles, and for him, he brought a linear and prescriptive theory of instruction. First, we have to think about objectives. Then we have to think about the contents. Then we have to think about the methodologies. And in the end, we have to think about assessment and evaluation. And this was a sacred order. This is a linear and prescriptive theory of instruction. So the rationale Tyler inaugurated the technicist curriculum or technological curriculum, the theory, the technological theories of curriculum centered on how to teach. How to teach. So centered on methodologies, on techniques, and never on what for or what am I teaching. So it was not, the access was not allowed to the teachers. That's why we say that in this era, the teacher is a technician, is not a professional. He doesn't need to think about the whole system. He just thinks about how to implement decisions taken at higher levels. As Toffler says, the general idea of gathering crowds of students, raw material, to be processed by teachers, workers, at the central school, factory, was a demonstration of industrial genius. Therefore, we can say that this school was in perfect harmony with the modern world that glorified the fragmentation of knowledge, that glorified objectivity, simplification, productivity, and effectiveness under the command of teaching, instruction, and didactics. But the question is, are these the times we live now? Paradigmatic rupture, the second part of my presentation. The answer seems obvious. We all feel that we live a time of change, and change in meteoric acceleration. We feel this not only in the small things of everyday life, in our routines, social habits and behaviors, personal and family relationships, as well as in the organizational structures, in the new professions, new scientific areas, missions and strategies of institutions. We feel that in the ideologies that I say don't animate anymore the social tensions, civilizational values, and above all, in the way of thinking. We live, as Sousa Santos, who is a good, very well-known Portuguese sociologist, Sousa Santos says, we live a moment of paradigmatic transition. So we call it these paradigms in the sense of Thomas Kuhn, in terms of the evolution of science. And as Kuhn says, the evolution is not made in a soft way, but through great breaks, by revolution, by rupture. But Sousa Santos says that we are living a transition of paradigms, not only societal, but also epistemological paradigms. And as an educational research, I am aware that in this new scenario of paradigmatic transition, there is no longer space for absolute certainty, not for security and stability. On the contrary, it prevails the certainty of uncertainty, the systematic doubt, a growing awareness of discontinuity, rupture, and non-linearity. For Edgar Morin, you know, the great French philosopher, we are facing a new order that also contemplates disorder. A new order that rejects the Cartesian or Manichaeist division arranged into reason and emotion. Post-modernity. Now we reject this Manichaeist division, reason and emotion, right and left, if you think of the political parties we have. It is not clear that division between right and left, between man and woman, black and white. When our times are times of interbreeding mestiçage, has it to do particularly with the social and human sciences? You might think that, oh, this happens, we are thinking, who thinks like this? Oh, these are the soft sciences, those social sciences that always have a special way of thinking. But I want to make it clear that this revolution of thinking started with the hard sciences. Maybe this revolution started from Edwin Hubble, when he succeeded in proving that the Milky Way was not the whole universe in 1929, but that universe is constantly expanding. The conclusion was drawn from the finding of nebulae in other galaxies moving away from us at tremendous speeds. This discovery raised the question about the origin of the universe, giving basis to the Big Bang question, the Big Bang theory formulated by Georgy Gamow, a Russian-born American physicist. Nevertheless, it would be Albert Einstein who initially resisted to the idea of cosmic origin, to question Newton's independent concepts of space and time, presenting the idea of space-time as one geometric entity with his theory of relativity, special relativity and general relativity later. Well, so new words start appearing in our lexicon. Relativity. Gaston Bachelard, when referring to the era of the new scientific spirit as opposed to the pre-scientific and scientific phase, clearly states that it is this first date, 1905, when with the first theory of Einstein, that marked the birth of the new scientific spirit, opening the way to more audacious abstractions and reasoning. So there are, for instance, so many others. So we have, for example, the quantum mechanics of Max Planck and the probabilistic theories, probable, attempt to that, the idea, the full meaning of the probabilistic theories, so in statistics. The wave mechanics of Louis de Broglie, the correspondence and complementarity theories of Niels Bohr, and the uncertainty principle of Werner Heisenberg, uncertainty principle, and many others who brought a new conception of physics which already contemplated the irregularities, disruptions, and disintegrations, and acknowledges the inevitable interference of the subject of the observation, striking down the absolute vision of what is reality. What is reality? There is always a subject observer. Thus, the concept of science gains a new meaning in rupture with the prevailing paradigm, understanding it as Kuhn understands what the members of a scientific community have in common. This position makes us look at science differently and raise questions on scientific theories. Are they descriptions of the reality? Or are they just instruments that allow us to better understand the reality until other better explanation emerge? You know Karl Popper, the philosopher of science, Popper's principle of falsifiability. He says that a theory is scientific only if it can be refuted. He says, in French, je les conçois les théories scientifiques comme autant d'inventions humaines, inventions, comme des filets créés par nous et destinés à capturer le monde. It's a way to cut the world. The philosophy of mathematics itself, from the Incompleteness Theorem, also called Theorem of Undecidability of Kurt Gödel, recognizes that the rigor of mathematical measurement, like any other form of rigor, rests on a criterion of selectivity. There is always someone who has to subjectively select the objective criterion or instrument or test in detriment of other. So when we think about objectivity, there is always someone, a subject, who selects the objective test, the objective criterion. So there arises a new relative and complex order, spreading from physical and natural world, so from the hard sciences, to the human and social sciences. In this context, the book of Lyotard, La Condition Pós-moderno, was published in 1979. Understanding scientific knowledge as a kind of discourse, Lyotard faces postmodernism as the end of meta-narratives. Meta-narratives, that means the end of the great explanatory schemas of the world, whether they are totalitarian ideologies or systems of knowledge, as has been the case of science. So he presents science as a dictatorship. The absolute truths and the idea of science as the source of all truth are now rejected. But are we living in a stage of rupture or of evolution of modernity? Just to go quickly, we have some concepts according to the orders. Lyotard considers that we are living already the post-modernity. The prefix post means that we have finished the modernity, while Giddens considers that we are living late modernity, radicalized modernity. Bauman, it's interesting, this idea of the liquid modernity, the complexity that something that is liquid is difficult to take it in our hands as something concrete. And Lipovetsky considers that no, we are living at an hyper-modernity. Because, this says Lipovetsky, there are some characteristics of the modernity that are accentuated now. For example, the individualism, egocentrism, the consumerism, the hedonism. So he considers that no, we are in a stage of hyper-modernity. So, what to do? It is possible for the school to ignore all this epistemological uproar when it deals with the knowledge. Can the curriculum continue to insist on fragmented knowledge? In a TED conference entitled How Schools Kill Creativity, greatly disseminated through the internet, Ken Robinson, speaking about the hierarchy of the disciplines that compose the curriculum, stated that every education system on earth has the same hierarchy of subjects. At the top are mathematics and languages, then the humanities, and in the bottom are the arts. Why does this happen? Does Robinson's statement merely emphasize a kind of natural order of things? And if we consider the relationship between language and thought, when we verbalize something, it helps our thought, and when we think, and so there is an intrinsic relationship between language and thought. We could say that the postmodern mental organization is based on the so-called absolute relativism, on the systematic doubt against universalizing presumptions, in a permanent questioning of the neutrality and the universality of the reason, because the postmodern world is fast, compressed, complex, and uncertain. So, to be consistent with this theoretical framework, there must be a disruptive change which is not easy. Mainly in the institutions, they are so heavy, they resist to change. Institutions are burdensome and averse to change. So, what do I propose to the curriculum in the scenario of a paradigmatic rupture? The paradigm rupture we have just described makes us educators change the focus of the curriculum we have been accustomed throughout the last centuries of schooling. Therefore, I propose the following. Now, we have to provoke change, provoke a transition or a shift from what? A shift towards interdisciplinary school projects to solve real problems which are currently occurring in the neighborhood, in the municipality, in the country, or in the world, instead of fragmentation into disciplinary subject matters without any personal meaning. There is no personal meaning. The students go and they don't see any interest. So we have to invest on interdisciplinary projects to solve real problems that affect us. Second, a shift towards the development of competences. This is a new word that comes in the educational world. Competences. Through the mobilization of knowledge, attitudes, and values in an integrated way. So competences has to be supported. We don't say that we neglect it to put apart knowledge, but we have to mobilize knowledge, attitudes, and values instead of mere insistence of contents, contenidos, to be conveyed by the teacher and given back by the student. So we have to leave this way of working at school, to give contents and then wait that the student answers us in the same way with the dots and the commas. We have to change radically. 3, a shift towards a transverse development of ecological awareness for a life in harmony with the environment, rather than the alienation that allows the exploitation of natural resources as if they were inexhaustible. This is one of the great problems the world is living now. So it is necessary a transverse development of this ecological awareness. We have a Brazilian pedagogue that passed away already. I don't know if you have heard about him, Paulo Freire. He brought a new verb or a new noun, which is conscientização. Conscientização, awareness, to be aware. In Portuguese, from Portugal, we don't have this word. Conscientização, so a political awareness with responsibility. 4, a shift towards socio-constructivist learning processes centered on mathematics. Because this word brought by Comenius, mathematics, the focus is learning, not teaching. So in contrast with didactics, we are stressing too much on didactics. Instead of didactics, we have to pay attention to mathematics and how to develop the socio-constructivist from all those development psychologists from Jean Piaget. But there are others that they don't face the person, the individual, in a passive way. The individual is not passive, is not a tabula rasa that registers everything from the society, from the milieu, but the individual is active. He constructs his knowledge. It is not because someone is giving, but he has to construct, he has to build himself or herself the knowledge. So, mathematics instead of didactics, concerned with instructional procedures of the so-called, and I'm afraid of this concept, good teaching practices. Good teaching as models, good teaching practice. Let's disseminate good teaching practice. Each one has its own way of teaching. So there are no models. So let's stress the idea of the learner. In a movie, the learner is the main protagonist. The teacher is the second protagonist. 5. A shift towards systemic, horizontal, and group communication using not only native language, but foreign languages and digital literacy instead of linear, vertical, and one-direction communication controlled by the teacher. The communication should be different. So that's why the classrooms should have chairs, mobile chairs, so we can rearrange and not organize to be listeners, so that the students are only listeners. 6. A shift towards the development of healthy eating habits. School thinks that it is not its responsibility, but eating habits and effective physical training as fundamental aspects of curriculum, instead of long hours sitting quietly as listeners in the classroom. 7. A shift towards the internalization of the concept of human species and our survival as inhabitants of planet Earth, instead of promoting an accentuated historical nationalism. It is responsibility of the school to put the students, the pupils, as part of the planet Earth for his survival. 8. A shift in the political and pedagogical sense of inclusion and equity, rather than the intolerance that seeks at all costs the standardization of the different other or his/her exclusion. So I don't speak of equality, of sameness, but of equity, which is a different concept. We don't start a race, everyone in the same line, but you have to give, to take into account the position where the person starts from. So this is the idea for equity. A shift towards cooperative and participatory work at various levels. And the teacher sometimes thinks that he is alone, he can come to the classroom, close the door, and he is alone. But no, he has to do cooperative work at various levels. We need the participation of students, teachers, school principals, families, communities, researchers, and the rulers, the politicians, instead of the civic apathy that I feel shocked with the civic apathy of our youth. And competitiveness fueled by fierce individualism. And finally, this is a round number, 10 proposals, the recognition of the need for time, long time, for the students' free initiative, whether to sleep, to rest, or to be genuinely with friends, talking, playing, or dating, without being organized by the school. School thinks that has to take all the control of the students' time. If someone, a teacher, misses the class, so he has to have a substitute because the child cannot be alone. There is we don't give time for the child to learn by himself or herself. Are we afraid that he scratches the knee, or that he gets sick? Or we are overprotective. We don't trust his or their initiative. So, taking back my introductory words, education has to keep pace with the new scenario we live in order to be taken into account for the change of people's behaviors and attitudes, being focused on the greatest problems of humanity and creative ways to solve them. Scholars as Edward de Bono, Joy Paul Guilford, or Robert Sternberg have been alerting to the fact that schools do not train divergent or alternative thinking, but just to answer to the expected teachers' questions, expected teachers' certainties. And doing that, they won't trouble teachers' certainties. So are we prepared to welcome troublemakers in our classrooms? Society praises conformists, but honors troublemakers who make the world step forward. Only a paradigm shift in the area of education and teacher education in terms of pedagogical innovation will advance the fruition of our brave postmodern world. Thank you for your attention.